For 10 long years, Jed Harper had lived in a silence so complete it seemed to swallow the vast Montana plains around his ranch. The wind carved through the hills like a restless spirit, carrying whispers of days gone by, the scent of dry grass, and the faint echo of laughter he hadn't heard in over a decade. He had once known the warmth of family, of shared meals and late-night stories by the fire, but that life had been stripped from him by loss, betrayal, and circumstances too cruel to recount. Since then, he had chosen solitude, building a fortress of routine and work around him. His neighbors spoke of him in hushed tones, calling him a recluse, a man hardened by grief. Yet even they could not imagine the quiet ache he carried beneath his stoic exterior. Jed had come to believe he no longer had space in his heart for anyone. Love, friendship, companionship, all had become dangerous illusions he dared not entertain. Every day followed a rhythm so rigid it was almost comforting. Sunrise brought the familiar call of the cattle, their lowing a symphony Jed had grown to cherish. His hands moved automatically, tending to fences, mending equipment, riding the endless stretches of prairie as if the land itself were his only family. Nights were colder, lonelier, the only warmth coming from the small fire he kept burning in the hearth, and the sparse letters he sometimes received from distant townsfolk. Yet even in these letters, there was only news of the world beyond his ranch, news that reminded him he was a man apart, untouched by the laughter and sorrow that connected others. For 10 years, Jed Harper had lived as if he were a ghost, drifting through days that blurred seamlessly into nights. But the universe, in its unpredictable way, had a plan for Jed that he could never have foreseen. On a crisp morning in late October, the mail wagon creaked along the winding dirt road leading to the ranch. It was a sound Jed had long stopped noticing, yet today something about it made his chest tighten, with a strange anticipation he couldn't name. The wagon stopped, and the driver handed over the usual parcels. But among them was a small package. A woman. She stepped down carefully, eyes wide, hands trembling, clutching a letter of introduction. Jed's gaze narrowed as he read the letter. It bore the name of a mail-order bride, meant for a ranch hundreds of miles away, mistakenly sent to his doorstep. And yet, there she was, standing under the bright autumn sun, a stranger in the middle of his carefully ordered, solitary life. Her name was Clara, and even in the awkwardness of the moment, there was something mesmerizing about her presence. She apologized, explained the mix-up with the agency, but Jed could do nothing but stare. He had expected silence, solitude, even emptiness, but not this. Her eyes were a storm of emotion, fear, hope, courage, and for the first time in years, Jed felt something stir in his chest, something he had long thought dead, curiosity. Intrigue, the faint whisper of desire. Clara's arrival felt like a gust of wind through the boarded windows of his heart, rattling the old dust and forgotten memories. He wanted to tell her to leave, to return to the life she had been promised elsewhere, yet a strange pull held him back. The first days were awkward, tentative. Jed and Clara moved around each other like strangers, navigating unfamiliar territory. She was careful with the cattle, clumsy in the kitchen, yet every misstep carried a charm that Jed couldn't deny. She asked questions about the ranch, about the routines, about the land itself, and Jed found himself answering, explaining, even laughing quietly at her errors. For the first time in years, the ranch felt alive, the silence punctuated by human voices. Clara carried a quiet fire within her, a resilience that Jed found both frustrating and magnetic. She refused to be pitied, refused to be a victim of circumstance, and slowly she began to pierce the walls he had built around himself. Nights were the hardest. Jed had grown accustomed to the cold, the isolation, the absence of warmth. But now Clara's presence in the house, the clatter of dishes, the faint scent of her perfume, the light that lingered in the hallway, made the darkness feel smaller, the night almost bearable. They would sit by the fire, sometimes in silence, sometimes speaking of things long forgotten or barely understood. Jed found himself sharing stories of his past, of the love and loss that had defined him, stories he had buried under years of work and solitude. Clara listened, not with judgment, but with understanding, and it was in her listening that Jed felt an unfamiliar sense of peace. And yet fear lingered. How could he allow himself to hope again? How could he open his heart to someone who had appeared by mistake, someone who might vanish as suddenly as she had arrived? Jed's doubts clashed violently with the feelings. Clara inspired an unsteady mixture of longing, excitement, and terror. He found himself watching her as she moved about the ranch, noting the way her hair caught the sunlight, the determined set of her shoulders, the kindness in her hands as she tended to the animals. Each day, the walls around his heart cracked a little more, the fortress he had spent a decade building, slowly giving way to something new. By the time the first snow dusted the prairie, Jed Harper realized he could no longer deny the truth. Clara's arrival, though a mistake in paperwork, was no accident in his life. She had come to a man who had forgotten what it meant to feel, to love, to hope. And she had reminded him of the possibility of both joy and pain. The ranch, once a sanctuary of solitude, had become a place of potential, of connection, of life. And Jed, who had lived 10 years in silence, could feel a storm of emotion rising within him, a mixture of fear and exhilaration, of vulnerability and desire, of anticipation for a future he had never dared to imagine. Clara's presence was changing him, and though the road ahead was uncertain, Jed could sense that this accidental meeting was the beginning of something extraordinary. Perhaps mistakes were not mistakes after all. Perhaps they were the universe's way of reminding even the most wounded hearts that love could find its way, even through 10 long years of solitude.